Which one of these three gimbals is best to use with a smartphone? So these are three of Zhiyun's most recent releases. We've got the Crane M3, we've got the Smooth 5, and we have the Crane M2 S. So if you just want to use a smartphone on its own with a gimbal, then a small gimbal is going to be fine. But the problem arises when you want to use a bigger phone, like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, for example. And then maybe you want to add lenses and filters and a case, and that weight is going to be too much for a smaller gimbal. So I'm going to compare all three gimbals and look at things like ease of use, how well they work with a smartphone, maximum payload, and also which gimbal has the best app support. And what about portability and design? Can you program a motion time lapse? And can you do things like object tracking? So to make it equal for each gimbal, I'm going to test it with the same setup, and that's going to be this one, which is an iPhone 12 Pro Max, a moment anamorphic, a little Tiffin Black Pro Mist, and a K&F variable ND. So the whole thing together weighs 392 grams. So let's see if these gimbals can handle this payload.
All these gimbals work in a pretty similar way. The biggest difference is in how you mount a smartphone. The Smooth 5 is designed for smartphones only, which means there's no other option than to use this clamp. So the advantage of this is that it's faster to get started. So all you need to do is get the phone in the clamp and then adjust the arm at the front to balance. Power on and off you go. Now the downside of this is that you cannot mount a cage, for example like a small rig cage. So if you're using a cage like this, you'll need a gimbal with a mounting plate and a tripod-sized screw like this, which is what you get with the two Crane gimbals. And also with the two Crane gimbals, mounting and balancing a phone is a little bit more complicated. You need to add this mounting plate, which obviously comes with the gimbal, and then add this clamp if you're using one, and balancing does take a little bit longer. Aside from mounting and balancing, there's not much difference between them. With the Smooth 5 and the Crane M3, you simply tap the M button to cycle through the modes. But the Crane M3 also has the option to use the mini touchscreen as well. So some people might find this quicker because you can just go directly to the mode you want rather than having to click through until you find it. With the Crane M2 S, however, it's a single click for the most commonly used modes and then a double click for the modes like POV, Vortex and Portrait. It's only a small thing, but I quite like that idea because it makes cycling through the main three modes a little bit easier. The Smooth 5 definitely has the most complex controls on the handle. You get two control wheels and various buttons, so that does add a bit of a learning curve if you want to use every feature. On the other hand, the Crane M2 S has the simplest controls. Personally, I prefer my kit to be good at what it does in the simplest way possible. That said, overall, the Smooth 5 is the easiest to use with a smartphone, and that's mainly down to the quick balancing time. And then I'd probably put the Crane M3 and the Crane M2 S about the same in overall. So the official max payloads are 300 grams for the Smooth 5, 998 grams for the Crane M2 S, while with the Crane M3, there is no maximum weight, because Zhiyun says the gimbal can carry any camera as long as it's balanced. So actually in practice, I've found that I can go over 300 grams on the Smooth 5. Even though the M2S and the M3 can have max payloads that would easily handle 340 grams, if this smartphone isn't balanced well, the gimbal just shuts down. So with all three gimbals, because the weight of the smartphone plus extras is mostly at the end and at the top, this is what causes most of the balancing issues. So for that reason, ease of balancing comes down to the size of this arm at the front. Because the weight is unevenly distributed, we need this arm to extend as far as possible, and that way we can bring the weight of the lens and the filters back towards the middle. So how do they all compare? The Smooth 5 works well, and the arm allows us to balance this setup with some room to spare. As well with the Crane M3, there's still a bit of leeway here. But with the Crane M2 S, I found that this setup is right at the edge of what the gimbal can balance. To get this to balance, I had to push the arm all the way across here as far as it could go. So the Crane gimbals come with a smartphone clamp included, and it's nice and sturdy. And because it's made of metal, it's actually quite heavy for a clamp. So I tried to have the clamp as far along as possible to add a little bit of extra counterbalance. So there's actually a couple of fixes for the balancing issue, which I covered in my video about the Crane M2. So one is to place some weight on this side, and I just used some coins and blue tack. Another option is to mount the smartphone upside down. So now the weight is placed on the other side.
When it comes to balancing, I found that the Smooth 5 is the easiest, followed by the Crane M3 and then lastly the Crane M2 S. With smartphone gimbals, it seems to be the apps that frustrate people the most, especially if you're an Android user. I do get a lot of questions about gimbals, but particularly about the Android version of the app. And my answer is that pretty much all gimbal apps are less good on Android devices, unfortunately. And this is because the manufacturers of these Android devices, there's so many of them, and as well they often restrict access to third-party app developers to various things like lenses and frame rates and all kinds of other stuff. So that's why they often don't work as well and you don't get manual control. So when it comes to these two Crane gimbals, there is actually no official app that works with a smartphone. So when you connect to the ZY Play app, all you get is like a remote control, but there is a little hack that I've discovered so that you can connect the ZY Play app to the gimbal and use your smartphone. So unfortunately, and somewhat predictably, it's actually only going to work if you have an iPhone.
Normally with this app, we need to find the gimbal listed and then click connect. So both Crane gimbals are listed under Pro cameras. If you connect this way, like I say, all you get is a remote control. So swipe right to get smartphone gimbals and now choose Other Compatible Stabilizer. Click Connect Now and then click Entry Now without connecting. And just use the Bluetooth symbol to connect instead. Now if you get this message, just click Cancel, because if you click Confirm, all you get is a black screen. Okay, so now your smartphone is connected to the ZY Play app. And actually the one thing that doesn't work is the record button. But you can shoot time-lapse and motion time-lapse, which is where you program movement. And you also get manual control and you can adjust various other settings here. For example, you can adjust calibration manually, which is something I tend to use, especially with the Crane M2 S, because the Crane M3 actually has this adjustment wheel on the front. Anyway, there's all kinds of other features and settings that you can use, including using the live streaming. You'll just have to press record on the actual screen of your phone.
So the Smooth 5 doesn't just have one app supporting it, it actually has three. So there's the ZY Cami app, there's the StarCam app, which are both Zhiyun apps, and more recently Filmmaker Pro have now added support as well. So the Zhiyun apps are going to give you more options and generally work better on an iPhone than on Android. But with Filmic Pro, it works pretty much the same on Android and iPhone. But the thing about Filmic Pro is that it does depend a lot on the particular Android device that you have.
So let's look at the ZY Cami app. Comparing my Samsung Note 20 Ultra to my iPhone 12 Pro Max, on the Samsung, I cannot shoot at 60 frames per second. I'm limited to 24 and 30 frames per second. And there's no manual control. On the iPhone, I have 25 frames per second, as well as 60 frames per second options. There's also manual control for exposure and white balance. On the Samsung, I do get gesture control, which allows you to start recording with a gesture. And as well, you can set it to track you as soon as it starts recording. And there's also object tracking. Just drag your finger across the object on the screen or tap the trigger. There's also time-lapse and motion time-lapse, pano, dolly zoom, these are all supported, plus AI Live and Smart Mode. So StarCam is the Zhiyun app, which is a bit like Filmic Pro in that it gives you more manual control. And you also need this app to get focus control with the wheel at the side. So on my Samsung, the focus wheel wasn't very smooth, and there's also a 25 frames per second option, still no 60 frames per second. Now with Filmic Pro, on my Samsung, I'm able to shoot at 4K and 60 frames per second. And the focus wheel does seem to work smoother than with the StarCam app. Other than that, the app works as well as it works on my Samsung, with all the manual controls which are, as you would expect, generally more advanced than the Zhiyun StarCam app.
So if you do have an Android device, you're going to have to look into how well Filmmaker Pro works with it. With all that said, it's pretty clear that the Smooth 5 is the standout gimbal when it comes to app support.
Now, when it comes to the overall design and the look of the gimbal, I must say that the Crane M3 is the best looking of them all. I do also like the mini screen here, which allows you to make adjustments as well as showing you things like a live status of the gimbal motors, and this helps you to perfect things when you're balancing your smartphone. Another design feature I like about the Crane M3 is this wheel at the front, which can be assigned to allow you to control the roll axis. And this just makes it really easy to set the camera level, or even at a quirky angle if you want. The Smooth 5 doesn't look as nice, and the case that comes with it is pretty basic. Meanwhile, the three Crane gimbals both come with this nice looking carry case, if you opt to purchase it with the gimbal. One unique feature of the Smooth 5 is a focus zoom wheel, so that you can set focus or zoom easier, as well as perform nice smooth focus pulls. Both Crane gimbals have an inbuilt fill light, whereas the Smooth 5 has a detachable one. I don't know if you use these, but I guess Zhiyun have done their market research and it's something that's been requested. Anyway, they all work fine and come with different colored filters too. But when it comes to design though, I think that the Crane 3 is my favorite. In terms of portability, all three gimbals are pretty similar, but the Smooth 5 is the lightest and obviously the Crane 3 the heaviest.
Now, which of these gimbals you choose will of course depend a lot on your budget, and each gimbal has different purchasing options. So at the top of the range, we've got the Crane M3 with a full package, which is shipping I think currently for about $649. But that package does come with various extras, including this shotgun mic and all kinds of other stuff. But if you just buy the stripped down version of it, it's a much more affordable $369. So the Crane M2 S is $349, but that's if you want the case. If you don't, then it's a bit more affordable at $269. And then meanwhile, the Smooth 5 is $219 with the case, or without the case, $169. I do actually quite like the case because it allows me to pack in some other kit like moment lenses and filter adapters and stuff, but for an extra $50 you might find something for less than that. I did have a quick look on AliExpress and I found this quite a nice looking case here, which was about £15. As someone who reviews a lot of gimbals, I have plenty of choice, but I do find myself these days reaching for the Smooth 5. I just find it a little bit easier to get started, and for me it's like I don't want too many hurdles in the way. You know, when I want to get filming, I don't want to have to mess about with the balancing stuff. It does everything that I need, basically. It can carry the smartphone with some extras. I'm not someone who wants to plug a microphone in because I actually just record it like this with my Rode Go 2. So I'm recording straight onto here like I am now. If I'm using a gimbal, the same thing. So I don't need to plug in at the side of the phone. So yeah, if I had to choose between all these gimbals, then I'm gonna go for the Smooth 5. That said, I do really like the Crane M3, the whole design of it, and all the little mini screen, and it does look nice, and it just it's a bit heavier. You know, the weight gives you a little bit more stability in your hand, but it's just not quite as fast. So yeah, I would definitely use it though. So last is going to be the Crane M2 S. It's probably the least usable with a smartphone if you wanted to add extras. If you just use the smartphone on its own, it works really well. And it is quite simple to use. I've actually had a few comments about the Smooth 5. Some people saying that they found it hard to read the little mini screen on the front to see which mode the gimbal is in, especially in very bright daylight. So I just thought I'd mention that. I haven't personally had that problem, but it is a really small screen, and so I can imagine that if it's really bright light, maybe it is difficult to see. So that's just something to think about. So if you want to learn more about smartphone filmmaking, you can join us on Patreon, and we've got some extras to download there. I've got several ebooks on videography with a smartphone. There's the film look, there's a book on gimbals, there's a book on color grading, as well as a Discord server so we can all chat live there. Added to that, I do a regular filmmaking podcast. So if you want to join us, it'd be great to see you there. Big thanks to all my members there on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video.